Welcome back to Sean Makes, and in this video I'm actually really excited about it because every year for the last 5 years we do pretty intricate Halloween and Christmas light shows here at the house, sponsored by one of our companies. And this year we have done the Haunted Mansion, and it's a combination of lighting and video projection to make the entire show. We also have a new show coming up for Christmas. I'm not going to get into that right now, but a lot of people who see our shows on YouTube always ask me, how is this done? How is this done? Or how do you do this? Or explain this more. So I wanted to do a real comprehensive video on how our shows work, how our setup works, wiring, lighting, projection considerations, all that kind of stuff into one big video. So it's going to be a very top level overview as well as some detailed instructions and detailed information on some of the tech and wiring and things like that involved. If you already are someone that does light shows, whether it be using a Light-O-Rama controller or Lights Alive, some of this stuff is going to be very basic because I do want to explain the core basics for people who have no idea what any of this stuff is. But then I also want to get into the stuff that is a little bit more advanced for people who already are doing their own light shows. So just bear with me as we kind of go over everything to do with putting one of these shows on. All right, so starting from the top, I'm just going to go quickly over our entire house here. We are both blessed and cursed with a large house. Obviously, it's nice to have a large house and, all the things that come along with it. But when you're planning lighting and video shows, the larger property and larger house means more fixtures and more cables and more everything else to run. In previous years, I would actually spread out the show to utilize the entire property. I'd have these trees back here lit, and I'd have an entire setup of stuff here in this central garden. But this year for 2021, I completely changed that just because I found that spreading everything out, spreading all the lighting and equipment out, it just made everything too, not only complicated, but it didn't even look that great. First of all, you couldn't get it all in one shot if you were taking a video from the road or a picture from the road. It was hard to get all the elements, lighting over there, setup over here, lighting over there, lighting on the house. It was hard to get all that in one shot. So this year I completely changed it to have everything on the same plane. By same plane, I mean if the front of the house is the plane, everything is within, say, 10 or 20 feet of that. So the lighting trusses are here, approximately 20 feet from the front of the house. Projectors don't count because they're projecting on the house. And then of course you got a couple of miscellaneous things here, like some tombstones, our wireless speakers, and everything else. But the entire show now happens from here to there. So it's just what's there. We don't backlight any of the trees. We don't have anything going on really in the front gardens. And that's important just because of the effect that it has on the show. And I think you'll agree if you look back at some of our videos for Nightmare Before Christmas when we did that theme for Halloween, and some of our other shows in previous years to 2021, everything's very spread out, and it's just kind of hard to get a grasp of everything. All right, as you can probably imagine, our shows are all computer controlled. They are designed with the computer, they are sequenced with the computer using different software. My dog here. And but the actual programming, once it's all done, effectively is controlled by this. Now, what I've done here is, if you're familiar with Light-O-Rama and you already kind of have a similar setup, you might appreciate just this setup in general. Whereas what I've done is I've created a solid wood box. I framed it out, then I use 1-inch wood all around, and then a plexiglass top, and then this thick rubber covering. And essentially this is my control box. This thing, I bring it out. It's not permanent, it doesn't stay out here, but it is very protected from the elements. But I store it in my garage and I bring it out when we actually need to do the show setups. I like having everything in kind of one box. It's easy to I'm going to say it's easy to move around because it weighs a lot, but it just makes things more efficient than having to mount everything outside each year. I just roll this box out, drag this box out, connect it, and we're good to go. Not to say that setting these lights up is quick and easy, it's not, but this just makes things a little bit easier. So I'm going to get a little bit closer here and explain what all these components are for. All right, so if you've done this type of sequencing before in the past, you're probably very familiar with these. These are Light-O-Rama residential light control boxes. And essentially what they are is super smart relays and ways to turn lights on and off with the computer. They, of course, have a lot of additional technology, like being able to control smart pixels and multicolor lights. But keeping this sort of basic as a top-level overview, they really allow you to, each one of these individual boxes allows you to control 16 different channels of lighting. And you can see there's 16 different regular type extension cord outlets coming out of these boxes. So because I have 2 of these boxes, I effectively have 32 channels of lighting. And when I say channels, that doesn't necessarily mean 32 fixtures, because a fixture being a light, because you could technically have 1, 2, 10, 20 lights per channel. So it really just determines so a channel is basically a single or set of fixtures, depending on what's connected in the line down the line. So if I ran an extension cord from, say, this channel number 8 to a fixture, and then that fixture daisy chained to another fixture, as in I had a cord coming from that fixture's, the end of that extension cord to another fixture, I'm effectively creating a channel of multiple fixtures. So hopefully that makes some sense. But going a little bit further into this setup, you might wonder what some of these other components are. So here is a pretty high current DC 12 volt power supply. It's fairly large because I don't just use AC as in these this type of plug. I don't just use AC light fixtures in here. I use 12 volt and 24 volt DC fixtures as well. The Light-O-Rama, this box, doesn't control those directly as far as being able to control 12 volt or 24 volt right off the bat, because you have 110 volt power outlets coming out of here. So in order to make those 12 volt and 24 volt lights controllable, there's 2 different ways. You can connect the AC power to a 12 volt or 24 volt transformer, i.e. kind of like what you'd have for your laptop, a power supply that takes in AC and then outputs DC. The problem with using a transformer to control 12 volt or 24 volt lights is that it's inefficient, but it also requires warm up and cool down time. So as soon as you plug the transformer in, the light's probably not going to turn on right away. And when you unplug it, the light may even kind of stick around for 500 milliseconds or a second. Might not seem like much, but when you're trying to time a light show and it needs to be very precise, it becomes a mess. So what I'm doing is I'm using a big transformer and feeding relay boxes that I make. And relay boxes are over here. And I'm going to actually have a separate video on how I make those relay boxes in case it doesn't make sense. But essentially, they are AC relays that turn on and off very, very quickly when the Light-O-Rama box gives it an AC power, when it gives it AC power. Now, a relay essentially is a switch inside a little box. Show you here quickly. I'm going to open up one of these boxes. So here we have our relay boxes. Now, I don't want to lose you here, because if you're just starting out with lighting design and show sequencing, this is a completely optional thing. You need to use 12 volt lights or 24 volt lights. You can do the entire thing off the Light-O-Rama controller with AC lighting or even smart pixels. But I will show you a little bit in a few minutes the fixtures that I have out there that are 12 volts and why we need these. So what I have here, these are regular, your AC 110 volt or 120 volt lines going to the Light-O-Rama controller. In this case, we've got 5 different channels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see that you've got your positive and negative on each one of these relays. These are AC 110 volt or 120 volt relays. What happens is, as I explained, when the power gets applied here, the relay switch closes and makes contact, connecting this and this. So in this particular setup, a couple of pins in there that correspond to those ends here, or rather those terminal connectors, effectively get connected. So when this power gets applied here, relay closes, and these become one circuit. So what does that do? It switches super fast. So on one end, I have, in this case, this would probably be the negative of negative power or ground of the 12 volt or 24 volt fixture, but then the other side would be a constant positive 12 volts or 24 volts. This might sound a little bit confusing, and perhaps I'm not doing a great job of explaining it, but what I'm doing here is I'm using this relay to essentially connect or break the 12 volt circuit coming from the transformer. So the other end of these always has, on one end, always has power, is connected directly to the transformer, and then the other line, i.e. the negative part of the power supply to those lights, is connected to this relay. So as soon as the relay closes, literally within a millisecond, that light turns on. Doing it this way allows me to create timed show, or really, really good timed lights using low voltage lighting. And you can see I've got actually 2 of these relay boxes. This has 5 relays and this one has 8. So that's even kind of more complex looking. So that is the function of the transformer and the relay boxes. Thing up here, this little device, it's hard to see because it's dark, but this is something called an easy light linker. This allows, it's a Light-O-Rama option that allows you to control the Light-O-Rama boxes wirelessly. If you didn't have that, you'd have to use your laptop or your computer, run a really long Ethernet cable, like an RJ45 Ethernet cable, from the connection inside the Light-O-Rama board to a adapter that then plugs into your computer's USB port. So by using that, I have an adapter that plugs into my USB port that goes to a wireless adapter that's powered with a USB port. So I can literally walk around the yard or go drive in front of the house with my computer and this adapter and have full control of all this hardware from, you know, with 200 or 300 foot, maybe even 400 foot distance versus being tethered by a cable. So that's a completely optional device, but I find it really, really handy. And of course we have over here is another set of relays. So this isn't really much different than the relays that I explained on the other side of the box, except these relays don't deal with outputting power. They literally just deal with creating a connection. So I call these my trigger relays because I have devices out there in the yard, specifically the projection media players for the projectors and the, what do you call them? They're like spooky lamps. They're like $13, $14 Home Depot lamps that effectively have a push button. And effectively what these relays do is when these relays get connected to the line that effectively would have been connected to a push button, it connects the signal, connects the two wires and triggers that device. So by having this AC 110 input, again, going to the Light-O-Rama box, and then I've got these 2 little lines you can see that I've just kind of taped up here. This is then going to whatever device out there on the lawn that needs to be triggered. So the device doesn't need power. It just needs a quick connection to effectively mimic a button press in order to make that device work. And I will get more into that once we get out there and once I talk about the projection end of how this show works. So again, I don't want to lose you. If you're already a Light-O-Rama user, you probably are thinking this is very basic. These boxes can do way more than turn lights on and off. They can control smart pixels. You can even get a DMX adapter or build a DMX adapter to actually control DMX lighting. I do not have any DMX lighting in this show. And the reason why is because, well, DMX lighting is typically more expensive. It's definitely higher end. It's made for, theaters and, production companies and things like that. But also most DMX lighting is definitely not outdoor rated. Whereas when I look at something like this, these are RGB fixtures that are landscaping fixtures. They're IP65 or IP67, which just means that they're like waterproof or weatherproof. These fixtures can be had for $50 each and do a similar job to what the DMX lights do. The only disadvantage is that I can't easily control them and turn the colors, change the color during the show, which I could do with a DMX RGB light. All right, so let's talk about cabling. So a lot of people might think it's funny, and people who have talked about things is quite hilarious, but this entire show that lights up my entire front yard essentially runs off of one AC outlet. You have a 15 amp outlet, so you're at most pulling maybe 1500 or 1800 watts. And actually that's what this is. This is kind of called a kilowatt. So I can actually see the power draw from that outlet. Not required to do this kind of thing, it's just for my information. But what you're getting here is you got your main power source that goes in and runs through my box into the Light-O-Rama boxes, and that becomes the power supply for the Light-O-Rama boxes. And then that power is what the Light-O-Rama boxes use to power all the other AC devices coming off of them. So once you've kind of got that, you can start running individual cables, and it's kind of hard to see back here, but there is a plethora of cables. You know, I've got thousands and thousands of feet of extension cord. You might not necessarily need that. It depends how big your property is and how many fixtures you're going. But I find cable management, tying them up, really kind of important to not only my sanity, but just being efficient and not having a hazard all over the yard. So in this case, these cables come out of the Light-O-Rama box, and some will travel there to go and power this lighting array and lighting truss. Some will go here to power this lighting array and lighting truss, as well as these projectors. I should also say that despite the show being and lighting being, you know, basically all fed off that one outlet, the projectors and fog machines, which are under here, which I'll reveal in just a minute, are on their own outlets or on their own circuits simply because of power draw. Following the rest of the cabling coming out of the Light-O-Rama to here and here, the daisy chain cabling, so i.e. cabling that would have to power one of these lights and then matching the matching light on this side, runs along this section here. And I'm like a zip tie freak or cable tie freak. I zip tie and cable tie everything. You can see my grass is longer here than it is anywhere else. That's because the landscapers know for sure, do not ever run over Sean's cables, because we have huge bundles of cables here that are all zip tied together. And then you've got certain offshoots here. So that offshoot goes to power the projector and the projection trigger, or the speakers and the light down at the road. I'm not going to go, you know, really into this because it's an identical copy of what I explained over there. But you can see it's also in the ground on a concrete pad, same identical lights here. And just a heck of a lot of extension cords and 12-volt speaker wire that's acting as low voltage wire everywhere. In front of each gravestone, I've got 30 watt to 100 watt UV lights. And these gravestones are coated in a spray-on product called clear neon, which makes them glow. So under each one of these, I have a tombstone. Tombstone I CNC cut with our warehouse or shop CNC machine. But again, don't be intimidated. You can either buy a tombstone or something similar if you want to get this effect. Or you can carve one by hand out of foam. It just takes longer. But getting into this setup, and this 2021 is the first year I have done that. I did that for efficiency. You know, I've been doing this for 4 or 5 years now, and I'd have lights kind of on all these stands and all these supports all over the yard and all over the property, and I didn't want to have that. I wanted to have an easy way of kind of mounting all the required lighting. Plus I wanted more of a concert-like effect because this year and going forward, we're kind of focused on, you know, half light show, half projection mapping, or, you know, covering the house with projections. It was okay to do this. In prior years where there was less emphasis on projections and video, the video aspect, and more emphasis on the lighting, spreading the lights out may have made more sense. But again, these lighting trusses have made my life way easier because most of these lights are actually permanently mounted to those trusses. So I literally just unbolt the truss from the ground, put it in the garage, and store it for the season. Channel, going back to the channel descriptions we talked about earlier with Light-O-Rama box. Got one channel of purple, one channel of white. I've got an additional channel of these. These are like, you know, $20, $25 Amazon disco lights. And I tape them up with electrical tape to make them outdoor proof. And then they all get connected to one of these, which then goes to, again, its own channel in the Light-O-Rama adapter. Going up, I've got super bright 100 watt white LEDs that are on one channel. Essentially, those are blinders. They kind of just, cover the entire yard and part of the road. Not much of the road, really, just mostly the yard because you don't want to blind people driving. But they cover that area in super white light. So typically I use that for lightning effects and things like that. I've also got an identical 100 watt panels here. And by the way, when I speak about this lighting truss, it is literally an identical setup on that lighting truss. So if these disco lights turn on here, they also turn on there because they share the same channel, i.e. they're daisy chains. So I've got an extension cord running from the Light-O-Rama to here, Light-O-Rama to here, and then I've got all my disco lights plugged into there, but then I've also got an extension cord from there going down, coming across the lawn, and then going to there to power those 4 lights, matching lights there. In the case of these, I've got three RGB high wattage LEDs, which I can change color with a remote in advance to determine what color I want to be. They do not change color during the show. They're not DMX, they're not smart RGB pixels. They are literally just dumb, quote unquote, dumb fixtures. But I can change the color to say green or blue or purple with a remote, and it sticks to that color when they turn on and off during the show. So these are individual channels. So that's a single channel, 2, 3. So there's 3 channels on those 3 lights, so I can control them individually. So if I wanted to do a chase, I go da, 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 or turn all of them on at once or whatever. And again, these are mimics. So if I have a channel, if I've got a cord going here to power that light, there's a cord coming from here to go over there to power the top light on that section. And then the last thing is, well, second last thing. So I explained earlier why I have those relay controllers. They are to control some of the 12 volt lighting. So I've got these 1 watt white LEDs. They are 12 volts. So I just use low voltage, like speaker wire typically, to connect them. And I've got each one of these on its own channel. So again, I can do a full chase, 1, 2, 3, 4, or I can turn individual lights on as I want, of course mimicking it on the other side. So if this light's on here, that light corresponding to that position and fixture type is on over there because they are linked on the same circuit. Earlier I also spoke about the trigger relays, i.e. the relays that don't actually provide power, they literally just make a connection, and that is to control these funky little Home Depot lights. So they actually come, like in this case they all just get connected and then they all just get tethered together here. And then this wire is what then goes to the relay box, the relay on-off box over in my Light-O-Rama there. So that's generally explaining how this truss works. Coming over here, where I showed the gravestone earlier, the gravestones are designed to cover up this equipment. So here I've got upshot American DJ fog cannons. The upshot cannons are very, very cool because they end up looking like a CO2 cannon. So I'm going to turn those on so you can see what I mean with the effect here. All right, so I'm going to manually trigger these, and effectively what's going to happen here is identical to what happens when the trigger box gets triggered, or rather gets power from the Light-O-Rama controller. So again, that's the cool thing about these upshot ones versus regular, chintzy Halloween store fog machines, is that they're designed to shoot upwards. You can't just take a regular fog machine, turn it on its side and go up. It will break or eventually just stop working. These are designed to mimic CO2 cannons. I actually used to have CO2 cannons as part of this show when we did Nightmare Before Christmas. They did actually look better. They were a thicker fog, quite a bit taller, quite a bit fuller, and they dissipated really quickly. Why I sold them and why I don't like them is because they need CO2 to be powered. They need big CO2 cans, like they'd use it like a draft, like a bar or draft brewery or something, in order to be filling them. So I'd actually have a guy here come, because we run our show for a week and a half. He would have to come 2 or 3 times with CO2 just to make my CO2 cannons work, and I would probably spend $800 to $1,000 per season just on CO2. Doing it this way, I can get $20 to $30 jugs of fog fluid. Doesn't look as good, but it is so much cheaper. I don't have to deal with the super tall CO2 cans, and it's just an easier setup in general. And I don't have to hide those giant CO2 canisters. So yeah, I think it's a cool effect. You might be wondering, and you'll probably see it here, but one of the disadvantages of having, whether it be a CO2 cannon or a fog machine, is if it's really windy at night, the effect is kind of diminished, because as soon as those things shoot up, the wind just comes and takes it away. But it still gives a nice eerie atmosphere, and especially if the lights are on, the fog catches the lights, especially with these disco lights where they're very, very fine points of light, will shine through the fog and create like a super cool kind of a club-like effect. So all in all, I think this was a worthwhile investment to add to the show, and the kids especially. You know, as soon as they see those big plumes of fog, the first part of the show, that you can hear them clapping, they're like, wow, or cool, or whatever, right? So definitely something cool to add if you are doing definitely more of a music or an animated type show where it's going to a music track. The fog machines really come in handy. And just a final note on these fog machines, in order to actually mount them, you know, obviously this is a simple 2x4 frame. I've got a 3/4 inch outdoor piece of plywood, but then I've actually bolted it on one side, and then I have cut this super thick piece of plexiglass or acrylic, which holds it in from the top. So these definitely aren't easy to steal. Theft wasn't really a big consideration. It was more just keeping them in place and keeping them safe. So this entire setup here, because of this giant metal plate, weighs a good 150, 160 pounds. So it's not exactly easy to move to begin with. But yeah, that's what this entire panel is for, in case you're wondering why that was added. It was also there to sorry, I can't speak today. It was also there to act as a bit of a rain barrier, because you do have fans and cooling elements in these. I didn't want to have rain or snow directly fall into that and onto the fog machine, so instead it falls onto this piece of plastic. So if you're following along, you probably are going to ask the question, well, how do these fog machines get triggered in the show? They have a DMX input, but I've got no DMX connected. How does that work? So a lot of these fog machines will come with exterior remotes, literally a push button remote or a wireless remote that connects to the device via like a phono cable. In this case, we've got a 1/4 inch phono jack, like a really, really big speaker jack, or headphone jack, I should say. And essentially what I did is the cable that it came with, I cut it, and where the button is to control the device to turn it on, I hooked to another relay. So earlier in this video, I talked about the trigger relays, which are the relays that literally just take 2 wires and connect them together. Same exact thing is going on here. Inside this little gray box you can see attached to the enclosure and attached to the setup is a relay. You've got your AC power going to that relay. That AC power comes from the Light-O-Rama control box over in the courtyard there. And also going as part of this setup is an additional light that is AC powered. Up here it's hard to see, but there are LED floodlights up here. So that's actually the reason why this control box is here, not in with all the other control hardware in my main master box, is because having it here allows me to run one AC cord or one extension cord from the channel on the Light-O-Rama device to here, a 3 outlet extension cord. One of those plugs is the AC relay, which triggers the button press on the fog machine, and the other cord from this cord coming from here, I know I'm talking about a lot of cords, the other end goes to the lights. So really it's just one AC cord coming in, 2 AC cords going out. That's the only reason I put the trigger relay here. So once that AC cord gets power from Light-O-Rama, relay switches and this light turns on at the same time, and this light served the function of just providing additional light to that fog to light it up even more, which looks cooler at night. So really that is the simplest way I've been able to think of to control one of these fog machines. Of course, if you've got DMX setup, or which is like an addressable, more professional lighting setup on your Light-O-Rama or whatever control device you're using to sequence your shows, you can assign this a DMX channel and then control this directly from the Light-O-Rama sequencing software. But again, This setup I'm not using DMX, so it really was just easier to build a trigger relay to button press effectively the controller to turn the fog on during the show. As you can expect, sound is an important element of any one of these light and video shows. So we actually do sound in two different ways. We have a physical set of speakers here, and these are just cheap Amazon, well, relatively cheap Amazon speakers by Pile. Not exactly super high-end concert speakers, but they do a good job of making sure people out in the front, if they're standing out there, can hear the show. However, with COVID, when it struck in 2020, we started using an FM transmitter, which is definitely a safer, easier way for people to view the show. They stay in their car, they tune the radio station to 87.9, which is what our FM transmitter is set to, and they hear the audio that way instead. So the cool thing about these speakers is they actually have a built-in radio tuner. So I don't even have to run an audio cable from our playback device, our video player, or the Light-O-Rama computer, for example, that would normally control, or that would normally play your audio or video as well as control your lighting. There's no cable because the cable goes into the FM transmitter, and the FM transmitter will then broadcast to the cars on that station, and I can then change the mode here to 80, you can't see it probably because you're pretty far back there, but 87.9 FM, and the sound will automatically come through here. So I found that to be just a quick time saver, not having to worry about an extra set of cables when we clearly have thousands of feet of cable already. And these speakers do a great job of getting the audio far enough out. We have a pretty wide property here, and they do a sufficient job of that. And of course you can change the volume if it's too loud for the neighbors or too low and people can't hear it. So you may be watching this video hoping to plan a Christmas show. Most people who are doing these elaborate setups typically do them for Christmas rather than Halloween. We do them for both, and I'm more of a Halloween fan than a Christmas fan. But I wanted to touch base on these pumpkins. These are actually called Funkins, and they're foam pumpkins, and we've been using them for the last 4 years now. You know, they're more expensive than a natural pumpkin, but the cool thing is once they are carved for life. So they are literally just foam, and what I have done is I've drilled a hole in the back of each one and inserted a 12-volt DC. I think they're like half a watt or 1 watt LED light. And I think they're like a G4 or something, but what these two pins are is your positive and negative for the light. And then what I do is I've built wiring harnesses out of speaker cable and these receptacles that connect to these matching lights. And this entire setup, as far as the lights, is from Amazon. You can get these little light bulbs at Amazon. You can get these stray cut tails on Amazon as well, and just plug them in and give it 12 volts and have a lit pumpkin. And then for the entire pumpkin setup, I've built these rails that sit on top of my fence and have a steel bar coming up to match the hole in the bottom of each pumpkin. So it makes setup really, really easy each year. I just put the pumpkin on the steel bar, connect the wiring harness on the back, and the pumpkins are set up. Each section of these pumpkins are one channel, and they do connect to the DC, or rather the AC relays that are giving 12-volt DC power. So in the case of the box that has 5 relays or 5 channels, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pumpkin channels. So I can turn individual sets of pumpkins on at once. So I can do a chase, so I can go 1 set, 2 set, 3 set, 4 set, 5 set. I could turn them all at once. I can make them random. I can make them blink instead of having all the pumpkins on one circuit, which would be a little bit boring as far as show and light timing. I've gone over the entire setup of the actual lighting in the front yard here, but I think it's worth taking a few minutes to talk about the actual sequencing. Since the power of the Light-O-Rama system is really not just the hardware, you need the software to be able to program the shows, design the shows, and control it. So let's take a look at that really quickly, and just a top-level overview, and we'll come back and talk about the projection systems after. So again, this is a very top-level overview of the Light-O-Rama sequencing software. So the first thing you're going to do when you create a new project, this is going to be, as I said, a top-level overview of the Light-O-Rama software, the sequencing software. So again, this is going to be a top-level overview of the Light-O-Rama sequencing software. There are many YouTube tutorials as well as tutorials on the Light-O-Rama website on how to use the software, including way more advanced features. However, just to get the concepts down and show you how the software ties into the hardware and things I showed you outside, I'm going to create a sample show. So the first thing you're going to do is open up the Light-O-Rama sequencer. You're then going to select a media file. It can be a video file or an audio file. In this case, I'm just going to choose AC/DC Thunderstruck. It's going to ask to create timings automatically based on the what it detects in the show. It's going to tell you, give you the option of with the intervals, i.e. the rows of the timing of the show. I typically use tenth or half second. And of course, basically what the preview should look like. A preview being, there's a feature in the Light-O-Rama software I'm not going to get into in this particular section of the video, but where you can create a virtual preview to preview the show on your computer rather than the actual lights themselves. I'm just going to use the default preview. It's automatically going to use the channel assignments that I have previously loaded in here for my past show. And I've renamed them all, you can see. But there's essentially two different units out there. There's two 16 channel units. So you've got channel 1 through 16 here on the first unit, and then channel 1 through 16 on the second unit. What's very cool is once the audio file gets inputted, it creates a waveform at the top of the screen. So the waveform at the top of the screen it will actually show you the ups and downs and parts of the sequence. You can change the view on that to different colors or different sizes, depending on how reliant you are on the waveform. You can see I can make it really big or really small. And each one of these columns represents the timing in the show. If you recall, just a couple of seconds ago, we decided there were 1/10 of a second timings. So each one of these lines is a 1/10 of a second of the audio. And I can zoom in and out with my keyboard or mouse. And so basically this entire section is a 1/10 of a second. Here's the next 1/10 of a second. So those are your columns. Your rows represent the channels. So you can see I've got channel 110 is a white floodlight. You've got channel 111 is one of the RGB floodlights. Channel 115 is the rear white floods. The LED disco lights out there is channel 116. So again, that is the rows. The columns is the actual time of the row is the actual channel. So for example, to keep things simple, if I wanted to turn RGB flood 1 of 3 on, which is on channel 11, I would simply select the time I wanted to have it on. I could right click and insert on. So automatically now when I run the show, that light's going to be on during this duration. And you can see, again, the waveform as well during this time. So if I went a little bit further on to use these as beats and say I wanted to have that light on during that particular beat, I could go on every time I see a beat and turn that light on, effectively creating lights that go with the beat of the music. There's also a lot of different pre-designed wizards in here, like the Tapper Wizard and the Beat Wizard, that automatically go through sections of your audio to pre-populate the beats or highs and lows it detects in the audio to automatically insert into your channels to make this easier. So that's a very top level overview. I'm going to go ahead now and open up the 2021 Haunted Mansion show, which is, you can see what a full show actually looks like here, the actual full show. So as I scroll from left to right, you can see all these white dots represent on, gray is off. So anywhere it's gray, that channel's off. Anywhere it's white, the channel's on. Things like this, whereas it's kind of like a crosshatch thing, are different effects. So you can get twinkle effects and shimmer effects, which is twinkles, I believe, like a kind of a random on and off. A shimmer is like a strobe effect. So for example, if I wanted to put a strobe effect here during that time, I could just go insert shimmer and have that there. If your LED light fixture supports it, you can also do fade ups and fade downs. So if you didn't want to have the full intensity of the light, you can actually change the intensity levels within the software here as well. But scrolling from left to right, you can see that as the audio changes, what I'm doing with the lights change as well. So again, this looks complicated when you look at it like this because there's just so much involved. It's almost like writing a piece of music. But if you look at it on a channel by channel basis, you know, it's not really that hard to get a show like this put in place within a few days. And you can, of course, test it using the built-in preview editor, or you can actually control the lights automatically using this feature over here when you go control lights and then click on the control lights. And if the Light-O-Rama hardware is actually connected, you can select a section that you want to test and click on selection to play just the selection, and it will play the selection in real time on the lights outside your house. So you can definitely do this programming inside without looking at the lights, or you can certainly do it outside with looking at the lights as well. But I hope this covers the basics of what you need to know of programming a show with the Light-O-Rama sequencing software. Again, there are way more advanced things it can do, like RGB smart pixels and different types of animations and stuff, as well as DMX control. But the lighting that I have set up outside, again, is fairly simple on off. And if you recall outdoors as well, these are my trigger channels. So these are triggers for the projectors. So that on sequence is a button press of the lamps. This on sequence is a button press of the projectors. And that only happens once to start the projectors and to start the show. You'll notice that this channel has no other on timing throughout the entire show, which is this bottom channel here. Because once we've triggered the projector initially, the video's already started. We don't need to trigger it again. And while I'm here, I want to talk about the covers. Nothing special here, but I find that some of our bigger, more expensive hardware benefits from outdoor covers, and they're not specially made for these things. I literally find barbecue covers or outdoor fire pit covers from Amazon that fit, you know, the fog machine kind of setups I have, or the projectors. So the big reveal here under this is our biggest projector, which does the vast majority of the show. I was thinking about doing a separate video on just the projection enclosures that I build, but I think I can get a pretty good top level overview here because a lot of people are going to have questions about that. Professional, i.e. like, you know, proper projection mapping enclosures for theaters and outdoor sporting events and things are incredibly expensive. I've never seen one under $3,000. A lot of the enclosures, this is just the enclosure, not the projector, are, you know, $10,000 to $15,000 for a quality enclosure with air conditioning and heating. I've kind of put something similar together that is sufficient for our weather here in Southern Ontario when I'm using it during October and the early winter season. So let's go over that really quickly now. So this main projector is a Christie high-powered 12,000 lumen projector. Now, before you get intimidated and say, okay, I can't do projection mapping, just, you know, step back and realize the distance here and width of the house. You know, the entire house is, you know, 120 feet plus wide, but this section here, which I'm outlining with my finger, is the part where we actually do the projection mapping. We have another projection mapping section over here for this show with the bus, but again, where my finger is, that projector handles that component. So this projector is doing this fairly large section. However, most people do not have this length or width to deal with, and often a desktop 3,000 to 5,000 lumen projector that you can buy from the electronics store or Amazon will suffice. But in this case, this is a commercial cinema projector or theater projector, not home theater, but actual theater. And I build these big enclosures out of HDPE plastic for them. I build them out of plastic, not wood, for obvious reasons. They're being stored out here outside. When they're going to get wet, they're going to get snowed on. There's going to be a lot of temperature changes. So I don't want to deal with the hassles of wood and mold and things like that. So going inside here, you can see the projector is mounted inside this enclosure. And you'll also notice that I unscrewed the back of this. That is because when you can't just take a projector, like this especially, which has two different lamps, it's 12,000 lumens, stick it in a box and close it up. It will overheat within minutes, if not sooner. So I've designed these boxes to be adjustable for venting. So I seal them up when the show's not on, and while the show's not on, I've got this thing running. This is actually a Canframo RV heater. So this is from Amazon again. You can get them from Walmart as well. They're about $100, 75 watts. And what it does is it's a heating element that when it's the ambient temperature in the box is, I don't know what the set point is, but when it's low enough to introduce condensation and humidity issues, this automatically turns on, puts a heating element on and starts spinning the fan to move air around the box. And what that does is it keeps the projector warm and not condensing water inside, which of course is going to ruin your electronics while the projector's not on. Once this projector turns on, the box gets really hot, that thing automatically turns off, you don't have to worry about it. So again, this setup is going to be specific to me being here in Southern Ontario, where, you know, during our Halloween show, our temperature is anywhere from 5 to 15 degrees Celsius. And of course, Christmas is lower than that. I wouldn't recommend this particular setup if you're using this in the middle of summer. That's going to require a cooling element rather than a heating element. But for most people who are using this, are trying to do projection mapping in their house, they're probably using it for Christmas, which means it's going to be cooler outside rather than warmer. So again, I've got these little adjustments, and this entire enclosure I built. Might look a little bit intimidating, but it's not. It's really a box. It is a 4-sided box. I just made it a little bit fancier by putting some routed grooves in where I can slide this in, but you could just as easily have this on hinges, like I can actually show you one of my earlier projection box designs over there. So again, I've got this for airflow. I've got a 1/4-inch plexiglass in front of the lens to, again, keep the box sealed, but obviously let the projection come through. A piece of glass would also do that. And then I've got also this for airflow. And I just, you know, I don't know, I got a little bit fancy here because I have a CNC machine to do this, but all this stuff could be done with a table saw, miter saw, and a drill, of course. The projection technology itself and how these projectors work, I'm going to get into now. All right, so you probably heard me speak earlier of the RF or FM transmitter. That is what this is, and you can see if I turn the camera around, it is tuned to 87.9. You have an audio input into it and an audio output from my media player. This media player, I have an SD card on, and this particular media player is something called a MediaWiz Sprite. Media, M-E-D-E-A, not the conventional spelling of media. But what's cool about these is, of course, it is a 1080p player with an HDMI output. It also has a regular AV component outputs with a special adapter cable. But what's cool is they have a trigger. So this little section right here is actually a trigger to turn from the ambient looping video to a triggered video. So I've got 2 files on this drive. I've got the ambient video titled 000.mp4, which projects essentially my intermission. So it says, you know, welcome to the holidays at 20 Fox Run, please donate, please fill up your card, yada, yada, yada. And then when this trigger's triggered, i.e. when these wires touch together like a button, again, going back to the AC relay situation, triggered by the Light-O-Rama, which again triggers a relay, and the relay connects the wires, acting like a button. That's what triggers this. And that is programmed in my Light-O-Rama sequence, as I probably alluded to earlier. So what we have here is the HDMI cable going from this into the projector, the audio cable going out of here into the FM transmitter, and then the trigger wire coming out the box and down my layer of cords back to my control box in the courtyard. There's nothing unique about this. I would ignore this. The only reason this splitter is here is because, for whatever reason, this Christie projector didn't like being connected directly to this. The image wasn't showing correctly, so this was just a hack. So ignore that. Typically, you don't need that. Normally, you would just go HDMI right to the projector. In this case, I've got HDMI to here, and then HDMI from there to the projector. But that's just a technicality that you might run into sometimes when designing these shows. Is kind of a trial and error thing. Now I'm going to walk over to the other projector. Now this enclosure is a little bit more primitive and one that I built a couple of years back. So I didn't have the CNC machine, I just had regular garage hand and power tools. And what I've got here is a lid that is secured with these little clamps, which you can get in your local hardware store or even probably on Amazon. I can tell I love Amazon by now, right? And essentially, again, it is still made of HDP. I wouldn't ever recommend making one of these out of the wood. But what I've done here is I've actually got weather stripping attached to the inside just to make sure that the lid, when it's on, is super tight to the top here. This is a regular, plain old desktop projector, you know, one you could get on Amazon or Best Buy or Walmart or whatever. Nothing special about it. It is 4,000 lumens, so it is bright, but it is not excessively bright like our Christie's. And here is, again, one of those Canframo RV heaters, except this one has got the top on it that it comes with, whereas the one in the other projector enclosure I showed you earlier just had the top off just so it fit in the projection enclosure. Going around the front, you've got the 1/4-inch plexiglass panel, and I just decided to do the entire front panel in plexiglass instead of having to cut two panels separately, but you could just as easily have a small opening with a plexiglass cover there. And this is the exact same setup. You've got the media with Sprite, you've got an ambient file and trigger file on the SD card, you've got your projection trigger and your HDMI cable right into the projector. Oh, and there's my son triggering the fog machines. Apparently that was scary. Now, as far as fabricating these, what I like to do is actually have, even the other one, the larger one, is on the same type of setup, but the rear is on a hinge bolted through, and then when you actually bring the projector out to align it, you can move the projector box up and down and then drill into the side to lock the projector position. And I just designed them that way because I found over the years, you know, if I tried to prefix the position when I fabricated the enclosure, it would never get it right. Things change, position change, you know, level of the grass, etc. So having the back fixed on a hinge, on a swivel, and then having the front being able to be adjustable where the whole box moves up and down, and you can just attach it as needed, makes life a lot easier when you're aligning the projector to whatever you're projecting to. Another quick tip I wanted to mention: if you are going to be doing projection mapping of your house on a regular basis, it helps to actually have a fixed reference point or a mounting point outside in your yard for the projector. Otherwise, if you bring your projector out every year, and you want to say use the video from last year that you've already made on your house, you have to have the identical position, identical setup and angle and zoom and all that of your projector in order to make it fit your house, because the projection mapping video that you've made probably was made based on that angle and position. So it's hard to see here, but what I have is another concrete slab hidden under the garden here, and then I've got 4x4 receivers that you would typically use for like a fence or deck into the concrete slab, and then my stand for the projector, I come out, I drop it in the receivers, and I just screw it in, and that guarantees within, you know, maybe a fraction of an inch that this projector stand and projector is at the exact same position as it was the previous year, the previous time, the previous whatever. So I really am about, to be honest, is efficiency. I think the least efficient thing in this entire setup is not having color-coded extension cords and, you know, label extension cords. There are definitely some lighting people that that have that, and I commend you, but I haven't had the need for it, although that would be kind of cool. Anyway, what I'm getting at is I always like to have things easily repeatable. So if I've invested time into building a stand, to designing a projection show, or having someone else design a projection show for me, and I want to use that again, I want to make sure that I'm not going to be pulling the little hair I have left out trying to get the projector aligned. Of course, the other thing to mention here is that you know, you have to also consider theft. You know, theft isn't a big issue here where I am. You know, and of course I've got security cameras everywhere, and even got signs saying that you're on camera. But also with this being attached to these receivers in concrete, and then just being this industrial projector that weighs so much, and the stand weighs so much, it's not really easy to steal. It takes a forklift for me to move this around my warehouse by myself. And once I actually bring it here to the house, it's 2 or 3 people to load this on here and get it here, just because of the weight of the HDP box, the projector, the stand, and all that stuff. All right, so we've gone over the lighting, we've gone over the projectors. That's the tech part. How do we actually make the video to match the architecture of our house. So prior to 2021, I was doing all that myself, just like I did the lighting, sequencing, and music and audio and stuff myself. However, in 2021, I actually found a guy named James Fitzgerald, I believe his name is. He runs Fitz Studios in Bethpage, New York. The guy is a genius when it comes to projection mapping, and he's actually created an entire business out of pre-making Halloween and Christmas themed shows that you can buy and adapt to your house, or rather he'll adapt them for you. So the process is actually fairly simple. Once you've mounted your projector, you turn it on, you connect a computer, and you load generic projection mapping software. It's nothing special. It essentially, I'm going to cut to it here, but it is essentially software that puts a full white screen on your computer, or rather your projector, because your projector is connected to your computer, and then you literally trace line by line every part of your house. So you'll use your mouse and you'll go trace out the soffits, you'll trace out the windows, you'll trace out the doors, you'll trace out the foliage that you don't want projected on. Once you've created that projection image, you end up with typically a 1920 by 1080 or like a 1K still image that is a complete identical tracing of your house or cabin or whatever you're projecting on, RV, whatever you're projecting on, that you then send to him via email, and he will take his existing shows, which he kind of makes a template of, and adapt it to your house. And I think that was really cool, because I know my limits, and I think anything, you know, with this is once you expand, and you know, it's great to do everything yourself and say, yeah, I did it all from scratch, and I used to do all that, but he just does a much better job of coming up with these really cool projection shows that I would just rather map the house, give it to him, and then once he's gotten me the compiled rendered video that matches my particular house, I can focus on the other element of the show, which is now bringing in the lighting and sound and the separate projection over here. So again, I would highly recommend checking out Fitz Studios. He does have a YouTube channel, but you can also go to fitzstudios.org. He does custom shows as well. So if you don't want anything that anyone else has for a fairly high price, and trust me, he's probably worth it, he will design a completely custom show based on whatever theme you want. So one of the questions I get asked infrequently is, you know, how much does this all cost? Now, I don't want to get into specifics because everything is variable. You can go all out, or you can start small. I would recommend, obviously, most people start small, and especially if your budget requires that. Also, the size of your house, as I had alluded to before, is hugely variable, and this can have a big effect on what it costs. The Light-O-Rama system, I believe, starts around $320 US for like an actual 16-channel base residential package. So that's just the controller and the software that gets you started on sequencing lights. You can definitely go to light-orama.com and buy one of those. And then of course you get all your actual light fixtures, and then that is extremely variable in itself. You can buy $20 light fixtures, you can buy, you know, strands of Christmas lights on sale, or you could buy, you know, $500 DMX light fixtures. And then of course, once you get into the projection mapping components, also variable in the size of your house. I would say most 3,000 or 4,000 lumen desktop style, you know, home theater projectors are, you know, anywhere from $1,500 to about $3,000. So if you have a relatively small house and you can put the projector close enough, getting a short throw projector is also a good thing, because a short throw meaning you can put it closer and have a bigger image. You don't lose a lot of brightness over the distance. You can get started for, you know, $2,000 to $3,000 adding the projection element. Of course, once you get to a larger scale, larger house, etc., the sky is the limit. I don't want to get into specifics, as I said, but we're really talking into the mid 5 figures once you deal with the high-powered projectors, all the lighting, all the sound, all the various equipment and add-ons and stuff. But again, that is much more extreme than most people are going to, a level that most people need to get a good show or to really look good. So realistically, without projection mapping, with just doing light control, sound, and things like that, you could probably start a really nice light show, whether it be for Halloween or Christmas, for a $1,500 to $2,000 budget. Once you add projection mapping, or you scale up the size of your house, the number of fixtures, you could definitely get into the $6,000 all the way to $10,000 kind of limit on equipment once you add up all the custom light fixtures and the Light-O-Rama stuff and the projector and things like that. And of course, if you get a commercial industrial projector like one of the Christie units or something like that, you could be spending as much on the projector as you would on a good used car. So really it's highly variable, and I would definitely look at planning your budget and starting to figure out what you need before you start tackling this project and get ahead of yourself. I hope you found that helpful. Well, that about sums it up. I hope you enjoyed watching the behind the scenes tour of how we do the light shows here at Holidays at 20 Fox Run. Hope you learned something, and I hope we covered all the necessary bases to get you started in doing your own light and video shows. Again, some of the resources to check out are, of course, Light-O-Rama, which is light-orama.com. They have a ton of cool residential products to do lighting and sequencing shows just like this. And then you can also check out Fitz Studios at fitzstudios.org, and you can also check his YouTube channel out if you're interested in getting a projection mapping show done for your particular house. If you enjoyed this video, you found it informative, I make tons of stuff, or I'm planning to make tons of videos like this, where it goes over some of the things I make, some of the things I do. And if you want to see those videos, then make sure you subscribe to this channel, and of course, give the video a thumbs up if you can. Thanks for watching, we'll see you soon.